Thank you. So welcome to tonight's Active Travel Cafe, and we will start with our usual crowdsourced news updates. So if you've got any little tidbits to share or anything that's happening near you, small or large, do share them. It's always good to hear what's happening in the world of walking and cycling and active travel. And then we will hear from we've got two speakers tonight. I'm delighted to welcome Alice Ferguson, who is one of the founders of the contemporary play streets movement. And Alice is here to present 10 key learnings from the 16 years that Playing Out has been in action. So that is a prospect I'm really looking forward to. And then we've also got Ranty Highwayman, aka Mark Philpott, who's going to be talking a bit about pavements, which is very timely in light of the outcome on the pavement parking consultation, which was out 2 weeks ago from the government. So that's where we are tonight. Welcome everyone. I will start us off now with our crowdsourced news update, and you're invited to share that in the chat or put your hand up and share it from where you are. So I can see, I think Ruth has got her hand up, so over to you, Ruth.
Hello, everybody. I'm back in London after a week of cycling in the Netherlands, where it was awesome as usual. So the bit of news is any of you who live in West London or anywhere near West London, on Saturday the 24th, the MP for Putney is leading a sort of protest demanding that Hammersmith Bridge is open. Although, as we all know, it is open. It's open for walking, wheeling, cycling currently. But she is saying that traffic levels in Putney and the whole of that area are worse because of the closure of the bridge to cars and buses. We have empirical, I hope that's the right word, evidence that it absolutely isn't. It's lower over the whole of West London and pollution is lower. But she's still raising the myth that once the bridge is open, it'll all miraculously be marvellous. Anyway, she's got a photo opportunity at 12 o'clock on the south side of the bridge, the Barnes side of the bridge. Those of us who walk, cycle, wheel in the area, that's Chiswick, Barnes, Hammersmith, Richmond, Hounslow, Fulham, will be going there to show that the bridge is indeed open. We have a banner, and that the thing that she and all the other MPs and council leaders should be asking for is to make some kind of provision for the people who genuinely cannot walk, wheel and cycle. Because at the moment she's just being badgered by people who want to drive from one side of London to the other across that bridge, which, as we know, is listed, it's very beautiful, and simply cannot take the kind of traffic it used to have. And school kids are cycling over it and wheeling over it, and everybody's using it and are probably healthier for the thing. So if anyone on this call or knows anyone who lives anywhere near the bridge, please, Saturday the 24th at 12 o'clock, we will be on one side or another. Do come and find us and say hello, because you'll be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And now from the south to the north, Matthew in Darlington.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyone who was on the call a while ago will have heard me say that I was bringing a paper to our Borough Council's Communities and Local Services Scrutiny Committee, and I was seeking permission to set up a task and finish group of councillors. I was successful in that, so it went really well. And so we now have a joint task and finish. It's joint between the highways team and the public health team, with the remit to look at reducing road harm in its widest remit. We're looking at vulnerable groups, we're looking at disadvantaged groups, we're looking at severance, health effects of sedentary lifestyle, etc., etc. And the three broad areas, we're looking at how we communicate travel and road harm, whether that be local media, etc., or the council, and how the police respond and report on road danger. Do they use the word accident or collision? Do they say the car left the road or the driver lost control? We're also looking at how we handle data. We only look at KSIs. We're not looking at near misses. We're not looking at no injury data, and we're not reporting where people don't travel actively because it's too bloody dangerous for them. So we're looking at how we can capture that data. And the third thing we're looking at is physical interventions. So as well as letting you know the update, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for some expert witnesses to come and counter the motor normative, the only ways to widen the roads and to change the traffic signals approach of our local transport plan. So if there's anyone here or there's anyone you know who is sort of a good witness to call on communication, data collection analysis and highway interventions, I think I'm probably in the right crowd where you'd be able to know someone who could do that. I have secured our multimedia room with a laser display board, so we could have you from anywhere in the world potentially. If you don't fancy visiting Darlington, why not? It's a great place to visit. So it's a standard call. I will put my councillor email in the chat so that you can get in contact with me there, and I'd love to have a short list of people to talk to. So thank you very much.
Wow, what an invitation, Matthew. Person who sprung to my mind was Professor Ian Walker, I think. Do I mean Ian Walker? Yes, I do. He'd be brilliant if you've not heard of him. He's a very good talker and a professor. Now, let's hear from Ed in Manchester. Ed, is that you?
Yeah, it is. Mine's a similar vein of asking for help, really. So I'm a degree apprentice working at Mott MacDonald, and I'm in my final year. I'm doing my dissertation on active travel, with the title being "Are Active Travel Schemes Working?" So I am sending out questionnaires and looking for interviews with sending out questionnaires to people who work in local councils and boroughs, and then I'm doing interviews with any consultants who've worked on active travel schemes. So just seeing if anyone would be interested in taking part in that. Like Matthew, I'll put in my email address, so if anyone either wants some more information or would like to participate, that'd be great.
Again, another nice invitation. I'll definitely be happy to help with that, Ed. Pick up on your email. And while everyone else is maybe digesting or having a think about any news, a couple of things I've picked up I thought I'd share. I'm based in Manchester, so I've got a bit of a northern bias, but or northern England, I should say. If anyone's from Scotland, it'd be good to hear any news from there. So a couple of things I picked up. One was, I don't know if anyone here took part in the protests to try and prevent the closure of the Queensberry Tunnel, which runs between, or could run between, Bradford to Calderdale, as it's a former rail tunnel, but the whoever owns it, I can't remember who it is, some government department, are planning to fill that in, and there's protests to try and keep that open so that it could in future be used as a tunnel. It's quite interesting. I noted that down in Rhondda, there's a similar rail tunnel which has been closed since the 60s, which just got approval to be first stage of planning permission to be reopened as a walking and cycling route. Wondered if there's a connection there between, in fact, Wales is now a devolved government, and in England, sadly, we're still working on our devolved approach. The other bit of news, I don't know how many of you this affects, but the Tour de France route, the Grand Depart for 2027 was announced this week. Some of us in Greater Manchester have been studying the men's route. I reckon there's about, or someone in our group reckons there's about half a mile that might go through Greater Manchester, but the rest of it starts up in the north and runs down to Liverpool. But the Tour de France Femme, first time coming to the UK, that will be running from Leeds to Manchester and Manchester to Sheffield. So that's really exciting. Some great terrain that's going to pass through. And on just a final sort of local piece of news, again, in light of, I guess, this first month of the year has been quite big on government announcements. We had the road safety strategy. We had a very serious crash in Bolton in the north of the borough with 4 people killed, which made the national news because there was, quite a high profile crash and evidence of sort of speeding behaviours. So that's been quite a shock locally, and we have adopted the Vision Zero action plan locally. So in light of that, obviously that's been taken very seriously, and how can we respond to that? So that's not sort of strictly kind of active travel, but it's all connected. So that's a little bit of news I had to share. Does anyone have anything else before we think about inviting our first speaker?
Yes.
Did I have a hand up?
Sorry,
I've not seen anyone
can't put my
else's hands
electronic
up.
hand up. I can't put my electronic hand up.
Well, I will invite you in, Robin.
Thanks very much. Yeah, two little bits of news from Oxfordshire. One is it very much relates to that topic. I've recently analysed a third year of data from the low traffic neighbourhoods in Cowley in Oxford, and have added up, compared to pre-LTN levels, a total of 30 casualties saved. And I've put that on our local campaign website. And you can do this if you've got a scheme of similar size and shape. You can do this using Crash Map, or the Cycle Streets bike data one is better, because you can define a cordon and then look at different time pieces. And I think that the 30 casualties avoided in 3 years is a very powerful headline, such that BBC Radio Oxford called me today and said, can I come along on Friday? As long as Trump hasn't invaded anywhere, we'll hear you out, which is great publicity. And then the second one is we have a temporary congestion charge going. So far, the results are very positive. And even the shopping centre, the main shopping centre in Oxford, said its shops had a very good Christmas, which is great. Less traffic. And more people using the buses means that the car parks were still full, actually, but more people were on the buses because there's less congestion, so more people get to the shops, is my theory. But I will call them the pro traffic jams campaign group were running a judicial, they were campaigning for a judicial review of the congestion charge. The High Court turned it down. They said, no, you can't even apply for a judicial review. We'll turn it down at the very first stage. They can apply for a reconsideration in a 30-minute hearing. We expect they will do that. They'll pay more money to their lawyers, and I suspect they'll probably get turned down again. So that is two bits of good news. If talking about casualties, well, casualties going down is good news, I guess. When they get to zero, it'll be very good news. I'll pop a link to that in the chat.
Definitely good news. Thank you, Robin. Ruth, did you have another one?
Yes, very quick. Lillian Greenwood, the Parliamentary Under Secretary for Department for Transport, has said that they will now be republicising the Highway Code for the next year, because I think we all criticised the fact that it was released and then there wasn't enough publicity. But they're doing it via the Think campaign. And I don't think Robert's on here tonight. I can't see him, but I think he and I both think similarly about the Think campaign, which tends to be very heavily on drivers should do this. Vulnerable road users should do that, blah, blah, blah. So I think we should all keep an eye out on that and write to our own MPs to make sure that the Highway Code is properly launched again, because it wasn't when it first came out. So I beg you all, write to all your MPs about this, because it's very, very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. And I'm going to move us on to our main speaker now. Although did I just see Shane join from Ireland? Because I did spot in the news this week some £360 million for active travel announced in Ireland. So I don't know if Shane, if you're here, if you want to tell us a bit about that. Looked like good news for some schemes in Dublin, Cork, Limerick and Waterford. Shane, if you're here, if not, I will invite Alice now from Playing Out, who's our main speaker this week, and to talk to us about everything that they've learned. Well, the 10 things they've learned from the 16 years of this brilliant organisation. Over to you, Alice.
Sorry, trying to find the unmute button. Thanks very much for having me. I'm going to try and speak without notes, because I just realised I can't see my notes. So sorry if I start rambling, but I will try to keep it concise. So 16 years of playing out. What have we learned? so I don't know, most of you have probably heard, heard of Playing Out. So we are a national organisation now, but we started as a group of parents in Bristol in 2008, 2009, who were feeling that we wanted to change things for our own children and for children more widely. We felt that children had lost something very valuable in not having the freedom to just go outside and play that we had all grown up with in the 70s, and that we wanted to try and do something about it. So we started with the temporary play street model that my neighbour Amy and I developed on our own street. And it was a very simple idea, just to close our street through traffic for a couple of hours after school. And because it kind of worked really well, the model, we then worked with Bristol City Council to co-develop a policy that allowed any street, pretty much any street in Bristol, to do this on a regular basis up to once a week. And then over the 16 years subsequently, through Playing Out, through our work, we have helped this model to grow. It's spread across the UK, and over 100 councils now have a play street policy, and about 1,600 street communities that we know of have regularly played out, and tens of thousands of children have benefited. There's lots about the impact of play streets on our website. And alongside growing the play street movement, we've campaigned for broader changes, policy changes, to address the barriers to children playing out, and obviously traffic and the sort of the lack of safe streets is a big one, probably the biggest one. So it's very relevant to this audience. And also, just to say, you may or may not have heard that we've made the decision to end Playing Out as an organisation at the end of March. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's a positive decision. It's not just that, we've run out of money, or just that we've got tired of it, although we have got a bit tired of it, and it is really hard fundraising incessantly. But there are positive reasons, and we want to kind of see this as a moment of releasing the play street movement, into the world. And we really hope that it's going to just continue to grow and thrive without the organisation there behind it. So we've tried to, because we're at this moment of ending things, we want to share some of what we've learned and hopefully have some influence over what happens next. If I can move my slides on. And there we go. So I'll just try to go through these. Slides aren't working. Okay, just try to go through these quite quickly. So these are sort of 10 key learnings. They're not everything that we've learned, but hopefully some of them are quite relevant to streets and active travel. So the first one is that children really have lost a lot, and we felt this as parents when we started Playing Out, and we now know this even more strongly. And actually, things have in some ways got worse for children during the 16 years that we've been doing this. It's really clear that children are not outside as much as they need to be, or as much as they used to be, and that their health, their mental health and their physical health is really suffering as a result of that. And there's a lot of evidence now to show that this is true. It's not just a kind of nostalgic feeling about, wasn't it great back in the day? Things really have got worse for children in a lot of ways. I don't know why am I okay. So number 2 is the main thing that's stopping children from playing outside, getting all that benefit, is the environment. The outside environment has become more hostile to children over a generation or two. So we've kind of, like the last couple of years particularly, there's been a lot of talk about the impact of social media and screens and phones on children. And there's a tendency to kind of blame everything on that, including, you know, the fact that children aren't outside. But when we started this, 2009, smartphones were definitely not part of children's lives. And it was not the reason that children weren't outside. It was the outside environment that was stopping us as parents from feeling that our children could go out and play. So we see screens and phones and all that as more of a symptom of the fact that children are inside more, that they don't have the opportunity to be out connecting with their friends in real life. And it's kind of, you know, it's replaced that in some ways. So number 3 is that the impact of this kind of loss of free, in all senses of the word, play for children is felt most by the children who have the least. And there are lots of reasons for this. So kind of alongside children losing their freedom to just play outside in the neighborhood, what's replaced that has tended to be things like paid for activities, organized activities, parents having to take their children to things, and all of those things need a certain amount of money, parental time, transport, and so they're not equally available to all children. And it's quite often it's the children that don't have access to those things that also maybe don't have a garden or any usable outside space, so they're kind of doubly impacted. Number 4, a really positive thing that play streets have shown is that, contrary to sort of popular myth and what's in the media, children really want to play outside with their friends. You know, that's what, when they have the opportunity, that's what they're choosing to do. And also parents are not these kind of overprotective, you know, helicopter parents. A lot of parents really want this for their children as well. They want them to be free, and they sort of know that that's what they need to be happy and healthy. And play streets in particular have shown that a lot of parents are so motivated about this that they're willing to stick their neck out and try and change things in their own communities and in their own streets, which isn't always an easy thing to do. Number 5, play streets show that doorstep space for children in particular is really important and a really special space. And for most children, that is a street or it's a housing estate and the space around a housing estate. But it's important for lots of reasons for children, partly because it's so accessible. It's the immediate space outside their front door. It's the space that, if it's safe enough, they can get to independently. They don't need to be taken somewhere. They can take their bike right out the front door and learn to ride their bike in that space. But also it's a community space. It's where they can connect with the other people that live around them, not just other children, but neighbours of all ages, where they can feel a sense of belonging in their community. It's kind of an extension of their home. So it feels like their space, but it's a shared space. So it's kind of got all these amazing qualities if we can just make it a space that feels safe and welcoming for children. And so that brings me on to number 6, learning, which is the kind of ingredients that enable children to play freely and get all the amazing benefit of that are really simple. It's just a safe space on the doorstep and permission to use that space. So I won't go into the other whole area of permission, which kind of brings us on to no ball game signs and culture, but that is another big area that Playing Out has been campaigning on. But in terms of streets, just making that space safe from the point of view of cars and traffic, and letting children know that, you know, they can be out there, that is enough to make that space really usable. And number 7 is that through being able to play out freely, children get a lot of the physical activity that they need. So policymakers kind of tie themselves up in knots trying to work out how to get children to be less sedentary and more active and what we're going to do about this. And basically, it's really simple. Children want to play, and when they can play, they are really active. So it's, the answer is there. We just need to allow children to play freely, as well as walking and cycling and everything that comes along with that. Number 8 is that play streets are not just benefiting children and parents, they benefit the whole community and they help build a sense of community. And that kind of shows that making streets better for people in general is a really powerful way to build community, to bring people together, to break down barriers or imaginary barriers, and to build trust. And it feels like now, with everything that's kind of happening in the world and politically, this is really, really key and more important than ever. Number 9 is bottom-up resident-led action really matters and is really valuable. So sometimes kind of resident-led things and temporary things seem to get treated as a bit second best, like, oh, it's not as good as like permanent infrastructure change. And in some ways that's true. Obviously, it'd be great if you didn't need to drag bins out into the road to close them to cars, and that's what we want long term is more permanent changes. But resident-led bottom-up change is really powerful, both as a step towards that longer term change, but also in itself, because through taking action together as a community, people are building their confidence as kind of change makers, and they're developing more sense of stewardship, I suppose, over their local environment, and more sense of belonging in their communities. And through the process of doing it, they're also building those community connections. So it's really important. And the other side of this, I suppose, is that councils can do a lot to enable this. So Play Streets is a really good example of where a council policy kind of opens up the possibility to people in communities to take action. It's the council getting out of the way and allowing people to do what they want to do to change things in a positive way in their communities, and we need to see more of that. So finally, our 10th learning is that none of this is rocket science, that if we want children to be happier, healthier, to feel part of their communities, really all we need to do is create the conditions for them to be able to play out on their doorstep. And this picture is from a development outside Vienna, quite a big new housing development, where all the cars are, you barely even see any cars, but there is some parking off to the very edges of the development, and all the doorstep space is car free and child friendly, and you see signs of children and play everywhere. When I visited, it was during school day, so there weren't children, but there were just all these signs that children use and feel safe and welcome in that space. So we just need to see more of that. And just to end by saying there are some positive signs in terms of local and national policymakers starting to get this and realise that if they centre children more in built environment policy, so in transport, planning, housing, all these areas where children have traditionally not been considered, that the impact could be really huge, for children themselves, most importantly, but also for kind of wider society. If we start with children, everybody benefits. So, and one thing I just realised, a sort of 11th learning, which I could share, is that play for children, play and active travel are not two separate things. They're completely interlinked and overlapping. So if we want to enable children to walk and cycle and have that greater freedom to roam, we also need to look at play and realise that actually the conditions that enable the one also enable the other, and that for children, walking and cycling sometimes is play, and sometimes play consists of, you know, riding a bike and running around. So I think it's a really important thing to remember that these are not two separate things, and play needs to be fully integrated and considered within the topic of children's active travel. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
That's absolutely brilliant, Alice. Fascinating stuff, and thank you for distilling all of that. And I definitely would like to ask a bit about kind of what next for you personally. But we've got about 15 minutes before we'll move to Mark, our second speaker. So I've got a couple of questions in the Q&A to get us going. I wanted to pick up on one, which is, I thought it was really interesting how you started to allude to it there, how, you know, there's all this work going on about how on earth can we help children be more active? And yeah, well, here's the answer. Like, and I'm quite interested in framing, and how I was reading something yesterday about how children's obesity in the past has sort of been framed as kind of, well, it's parental choice, and if parents would make better decisions, we wouldn't have overweight children. And actually, increasingly, it's now being reframed as essentially a food industry problem and marketing, and that's actually becoming that's leading to a greater impact on children, that overall problem. So it just feels like if we can all work together to reframe the problem of safe streets as children's well-being rather than bloody cyclists or whatever the, you know, stereotype is, that would help everybody. Sorry, that's a very long-winded way of saying, how do you think we could continue your work, which has clearly done that? How do you think we could all work together to do that more?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might have given another talk at a previous Active Travel Cafe, which was exactly that, is why we need to sort of start with children in terms of talking about safer streets and active travel, because it's such a no-brainer. It's like, it's very difficult for people to disagree with the idea of, you know, making things better for children. And so it's like it's a common concern that does cut through, I think, some of that polarization that happens between different road user types. But also, the other really strong reason for kind of prioritizing children in this is that they're the ones that have been the least considered, I think, in transport policy making forever, you know. And so it's a sort of justice, you know, it's a justice issue as well to turn that around and actually prioritize children. I'm actually writing a paper with Tim Gill, just going into this whole thing in more depth, like why we need to sort of use a child lens on transport policy making, and that, you know, and including within active travel, I think, to just be really thinking about how do we make things work for children, and like you said, you know, and then that makes them work better for everybody.
Yeah. Right, let's get through some of these Q&A questions. Colin in Ealing has asked, in Ealing they've got an extensive play streets programme until the pandemic, but it has either gone or gone invisible since. Is this true elsewhere too?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Quite a few councils just stopped allowing play streets in the pandemic. And I mean, yeah, it was really frustrating because we were feeling like, you know, even when pubs were open, quite a lot of councils were not allowing play streets, and it was, you know, it was just nonsensical. But I think what happened was that happened at the same time that councils were becoming really cash strapped, and so
True.
sort of bringing it back sometimes wasn't a priority in that context. But other councils have launched policies since the pandemic, so it sort of swings and roundabouts a bit. But yeah, we would just say to any council, it's, you know, it's such a no-brainer to support play streets because it's really, really low cost and really high impact.
Yeah.
So just
Good.
do
Good
it.
question from Ruth here. Talk about evidence. Although many places now have play streets, which by their nature are not every day, week, month, have you managed to collate any evidence where it's moved on to making the streets child friendly in a permanent basis?
Yeah, we've heard anecdotally a bit of that. So I think what we do know is that where councils are already proposing changes to streets, that play streets can be a good kind of precursor to just build support for those changes. So it's not necessarily that the changes happen because of the play streets, but the play streets can help kind of those changes to happen more easily, maybe, or more with less conflict, because they kind of demonstrate the benefits. But it's not something that we've like gathered hard evidence of.
Okay. And another question here from Dave in Birmingham. Congratulations on keeping it going for 16 years. Question, how do we build coalitions of interest that enable cycle campaigners to work with walking campaigners and play campaigners? Just an easy question there for you, Alice. Sort that one out.
God, I don't know. I mean, so I'm in Bristol and I know we've got walking campaigners and cycle campaigners, and I do sometimes feel, they sort of need to work together more. But I mean, I don't know what the answer would be. Interesting to hear from other people what they think. But maybe starting with children is one way.
Well, I
better
found
streets for children, and then that sort of brings everybody together more.
One thing I think can help is to work on something together. So if that's a campaign or an event, or Dave, do you want to come in? David.
If I could have a follow-up, yeah. I mean, I'm nearly 80. I want to retire from campaigning. So I admire you tremendously to feel you can get out. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I come from cycle campaigning in the main. I've done school streets through another organisation, and it's quite successful in Birmingham. But you say we want to influence policymakers, and policy is made at ward level with various little grants for councillors, and it goes up through the city and the borough and the region. So we need a sort of people to put pressure on at all those levels. And we worked with Living Streets for a while with a local group, but they folded. I mean, we haven't got that many people active out of our 120 membership, but we've tried to set up a charity to walk, cycle, play to bring this common interest together. And I think we're going to pull it off. But to be honest, it's taken longer than the Second World War already to get it really going. We're using money we've accumulated from our membership to fund bike buses, and then activities growing out of bike buses, like, after school events for children getting together, libraries of different types of bikes for kids, all that sort of stuff, which is great. But as a cycle campaigner, you're limited. Cycling's great, holds us all together, but there's a limited number of people you could deploy over a city to actually put pressure on. So you want to broaden it out. But it's hard work, isn't it? Keeping it going is hard work. I mean, I'd just love to finish and say, right, I've done my bit.
But I have to say, I think what's kept us going, and I know like some people have been doing this a lot longer, and hats off, is feeling like we're part of a wider movement. It's not just playing out, it's, there's critical mass, which is an amazing growing movement for children's right to cycle, and that, there are lots of other things happening, and especially internationally, actually, this is like a really big movement for kind of more child-friendly cities and child-friendly planning. So that kind of encourages us. But yeah, it is hard. Change is hard.
Change is hard. I'm going to keep going through a few of these questions. Some of them are fairly straightforward. What's the best? Well, actually, this one might not be, but it's a focus question. What's the best approach to dealing with drivers who do not want to respect a play street?
Well, I mean, we've got a whole process around that on our website, and I've dealt with lots over the years. So, I mean, the initial approach is to try and just talk to them, explain what's going on and why you're doing it, and hope that you can appeal to, another part of them. But ultimately, if they are threatening to not respect the road closure, that's a police matter. And touch wood, we've only had that a couple of times out of tens of thousands of play streets. But it does worry me increasingly, actually, that something would happen. We've got a whole process for safety. So, I mean, the initial thing would be if there's any sense that a driver's not going to respect the road closure, then you just get all the children off the street. So that there are stewards each end of the street. The whole focus of the play street model is making it safe, which is really boring. Like we're not interested really in like putting on activities or anything like that. Is just creating a safe space, and a big part of that is having adult stewards at each end of the street to deal with cars, and worst case scenario, blowing their whistle and just getting all the children off the street. And also, they put their bodies in the way of, between children and the drivers. So, we have not, touch wood, had anything bad happen, but.
And presumably, Alice, some of this is on your website, is it? Resources?
Yeah, it's all on our website. There's a whole section on play streets with lots of sort of resources and
because Andy in Wiltshire has also asked about a school street at his nearby school where the children loved it, but a lot of negativity from teachers who called it disparagingly playing in the road and complained it was dangerous. Do you have any tips to countenance this motor normativity, which
Yeah, I think just doing it is the best way of countering it, just showing people the benefits. It's quite hard to argue with it once you see children, playing and having a really nice time and, being happy, and the parents also kind of really feeling relaxed and enjoying it. It's hard for people to continue sort of being negative and snipey about it when they see it. So where people are trying to do a play street and there's somebody really strongly objecting, normally we say just try and get them to agree to just one session happening so that they can just see it and experience it. And usually that is the best way to change people's minds.
3 quick ones here. One is, which I'll ask all together, hopefully. One is, how do I get hold of the green road open signs? They are great, but I can't seem to get hold of them. Secondly, when is the paper with Tim Gill going to be published? Is there a draft? Someone very interested in that. And lastly, I'll turn this into a question, which is a kind of shopping and is essentially, you've talked about playing, but actually enabling parents to go to the shops and use their local amenities. Is that part of this?
So first, the green signs, I think Brightways sell them. So they have a play street shop. And I'm pretty sure they do both types of green signs. So they did one that was specifically more for play streets, and then the sort of general.
I think you're right. If anyone who's listening could post a link to that in the chat, I definitely think it's Brightways. Alison, can't remember her surname.
Yeah.
Who's behind that? Yeah.
What was the second question?
Second one was the paper with Tim.
Oh, the paper.
Yeah.
I'm intending to get a draft done this week or next week. It's been, yeah, one of those sort of long ongoing things, but just because it's quite big and
Yeah. And
um,
presumably, if anyone's interested in that, they can email you via your
yeah,
website,
definitely.
where there'll be an email. And then, yeah, lastly, it was just that sort of connection, I guess, with using local amenities and
Yeah,
again,
I mean, I would
the
say, you know,
reframing point.
absolutely. Like, I suppose our big picture aim with Playing Out was restoring children's freedom in their neighborhood, in their kind of built environment. So the playing out, the play street bit is quite specific. It's, you know, it's about play and it's about doorstep space, but our aim with it has always been it's about changing culture around children having that, you know, access to the wider built environment, to all the amenities of their neighborhoods, to be able to get to even their local park or playground, which, you know, quite often they can't get to. So yeah, definitely see it as all connected and part of the same thing. And also another thing that actually I think Tim Gill said first was to remember that for a child, their street is the first step to on any journey. So if they don't have access to the space on their doorstep, how are we ever going to expect them to be able to go further afield, and vice versa?
Mute there. Thank you, Alice. Before we let you go, got one last question, which is about, so after this immense body of work that you've pulled together with others, but clearly a force yourself, kind of what is next for you? What do you what apart from having a big
I don't
rest?
know. I'm genuinely trying to keep it open and just have a bit of space to see what comes naturally, rather than, you know, the instinct is to line something up, and but I'm going to try and just have a little bit of space. So I don't know, watch this space, but I will definitely, I mean, I feel like it's kind of my life mission to fight for children's rights, and particularly, you know, children's rights in terms of spatial justice and streets and outdoor space. And so I don't think I'm going to be going too far from that.
And will the website continue as a sort
Oh
of body
yeah,
of
so
work? Yeah.
the Playing Out website is actually going to be rebuilt as a lasting resource, and it will be posted for at least another 5 years and hopefully longer. So that will all be there. We've got a Play Street forum for mainly professionals and people working to support Play Streets at any level, and that will continue. And there's information about that also on the website. If you go, or just drop us an email, hello@playingout.net, if you're interested in that. And we've got this conference, which I posted a link to, on the 12th of March, which is our sort of last hurrah of trying to bring everyone together from all the different kind of policy areas and campaigning areas that intersect on sort of children's rights in the built environment. So everybody's very welcome to come to that. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And we
So
just hope that the whole movement will continue to grow and change things for children. Sorry.
No, sorry for interrupting. Thank you so much, Alice. And I'm sure everybody here and everybody who's not here and on our email list and anyone who's involved with Active Travel Cafe, would just like to give you a big thanks for speaking tonight and all the work. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you in different places and forums. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of virtual claps. So now, in the final 20 minutes, we are going to hear from Mark, aka Ranty Highwayman, who is going to talk about pavements, and I will hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Claire. And it's not the pavements you were expecting. Maybe the first slide gives it away a little bit. There's a bit of a grainy photo of a digger there and a load of mud and all sorts going on here. So I'm going to be really pedantic tonight and talk about the real pavements. And the real pavement is the layers that make up what we see out there on the street. So our footways, we call them pavements often, but they're footways legally, cycle tracks, carriageways, other paved areas. I mean, we could talk about airport runways and all sorts of other paved areas, but this is largely what we're talking about tonight. So I'll show some graphics in a minute of some of the things I'm talking about. But essentially, when you talk about the structure of the roads, the carriageways, footways, cycle tracks, what you see on the surface, the tarmac, the concrete, the block paving, all that kind of stuff, that's generally the most expensive thing you see. But it's the only thing you see, largely, unless there's a massive hole dug out there. And things get cheaper the lower down you go. However, when you dig out the ground, that can be expensive because you have to obviously remove it. Sometimes you have to take the waste away. Sometimes there's really nasty stuff in there. And sometimes the soil underneath is really, really weak and it's not suitable for holding your highway pavement up. We can't really use topsoil because it has organics in it, it compresses, it rots, but we can reuse it for landscaping. Okay, we've got 3 types of pavement we're interested in, and I'll give you a couple of graphics in just a second. We have flexible, so the upper layers will be asphalt or small element paving, and by that I mean little tiles or block paving. But importantly, the whole thing can move around and flex very, very gently. You don't see it unless it goes really badly wrong. We can have rigid pavements, and that's where the upper layer is a concrete slab. We can have composite, and that's where we have a concrete layer and then something over the top, a bit more decorative perhaps. How do we choose a thickness? So there's lots of different things that we need to think about. So loading from traffic, and that's HGV. So lots of people talk about maybe the change from petrol cars to EV cars causing damage to the roads. Not the structural layers, it doesn't. Helps wear out the surfacing, but it's lorries and HGVs that we're really interested in. We're interested in the strength of the subgrade. That's the underlying soil. All terminology here, which will become obvious when I show you a graphic. And also, even in the UK, we have to worry about frost. So the top 450 millimeters roughly has to be frost proof. And if you get water into those layers, it freezes, water expands as it freezes, and that causes damage. And that's one of the actions that start to create potholes that we see out on the street. So loading from traffic, the little graphic on the right hand side there, you've got some dark grey layers, the asphalt, the light grey stone materials lower down, and then right at the very bottom there, that brown stripe is the subsoil, the ground underneath. And what happens is the load from a wheel gets into the ground and it gets supported in this way. So in other words, the top expensive layers support quite an intense point load, whereas the ground way down supports things over a much bigger area. It's like a sort of cone underneath the wheel as it makes contact. And in order to try and work out how thick the upper layer should be, we're interested in something called million standard axles. And that's just a fancy way of saying, well, here's a lorry, we convert its weight into a standard axle for measurement purposes. So lorries and buses and HGVs, they cause lots of million standard axles, whereas cars don't. So how do we actually find the strength of the subgrade, which is this lower layer, the actual soil below the construction of the pavement? We use a cleg hammer, not cleg getting hammered, cleg hammer. One for the younger viewers there maybe, last for the summer wine. We use the Clegg Impact Soil Tester, and the guy in the photo there has one of those wonderful pieces of kit. And what he's got essentially there is a bright yellow cylinder with some electronics on it. You can just see at the top he's dropping something in, he's holding a handle up there, and that's a 50mm diameter metal cylinder, which is dropping from the same height every time into the ground, and we're measuring how far that goes into the ground. Really, really interesting. Came from the 60s from Dr. Baden Clegg in the University of Western Australia, and that gives us something called a California bearing ratio, which I'll come to in a minute. And we're dropping this 4.5 kilo cylinder, the drop hammer, see how far it goes into the ground, get some average readings, and that gives us a measure of how strong the layers are. So California bearing what now? Here we have a rig. It has a 50mm diameter hammer within this tube, and that's been pushed into a soil sample in the I don't know, barrel at the bottom there, call it what you like. So again, back to this 50 mil thing, it's quite interesting if you're that way minded. Pushes this plunger, this 50 mil piece of metal into the soil at a standard rate, and it's trying to find out how strong something is, the materials. We can also mount those to the back of a truck. I've seen them being used with a massive excavator as your removable object, but just an ordinary pickup truck is heavy enough to make that thing work. And again, the thing's been pushed into the ground to see how strong it is, basically. Go look at the video of this from Hickstra. It's quite interesting for those that way minded. And what we find out, we do a conversion and we find out how strong the ground is, the California bearing ratio, and that's a measure of how strong the soil is or any other layers compared with some well compacted decent stone. 100% you have things, you probably have concrete and a hammer bouncing off it. If you get a CBR value of less than 2%, yes, further discussion necessary. But this graphic here is showing you that lots of different types of strength. So 15 plus is very, very strong. You're going to have some very thin layers of construction. If it's going down to 2, you're going to have some very thick layers of construction because you're making up for the bad ground conditions. So let's have a look at those layers. Flexible pavement here. So the top 3 are asphalt, surface course, binder course, and base course. Underneath that, we have a sub base, which is crushed rock or recycled concrete, and that's what you often see when road workers are digging holes as you look through the layers. We can sometimes have a capping, which is all sorts of wonderful recycled soils and other materials, and below that, the original ground level that sits below. So here we go: surface, binder, sub base, small stones, lots of binder materials, very, very expensive, but put on thinly. Binder, larger stones, still with some bituminous materials in there, bit cheaper. Sub base, crushed rock or crushed concrete, a lot cheaper. Bigger stones. Exactly what the Romans used to do all those years ago. With a rigid construction, so the asphalt layers are replaced by concrete, so that could be a reinforced slab, an unreinforced slab. We still have sub base, we still have the capping, and we still have our subgrade. But here's some pretty pictures here of some concrete being laid. In this particular example, we're not using steel mesh reinforcement, you know, the grid squares that you've seen people using on buildings and in roads and things. We're actually using lots and lots of tiny fibers within that concrete there. In that particular example, there'd be stainless steel. So like, maybe 50 millimeters long, pressed to be quite corrugated, and that just binds everything together. At the bottom, they're laying a matting that goes down before they put an asphalt surface, just so it looks a bit nicer than bare concrete. Here we have 2 types of paving. Block paving at the top, as I said before, that's treated as flexible, so that can move very, very gently under loading. Whereas at the bottom, we've got some lovely natural stone material there. That's laid on a concrete slab because that's notorious for failing under loading. And where you see utility companies going through this lovely paving at the bottom and it gets left as a scar for months and months, that's because it's really hard to repair. So designers, when they think about this type of finish, they've really got to work hard to make it something that the utilities could repair. Personally, I like small element because you can pick them up and relay them. And that's why places like the Netherlands use them absolutely everywhere, because they're dead easy to use. The problem in the UK is that the qualifications for people who are working on the streets don't tend now to include block paving or concrete, which might explain quite a lot why we see things dug up for ages and ages. But finally, if stuff gets really bad, we get this really weak ground, we can use something like GeoWeb. And what you have here is a plastic mesh that comes on a roll. You pull it out like a concertina and you create all these little cells, little square cells here. And into those cells, as the digger's got there, he's pushing in all sorts of crushed rock and stone into those holes, and that creates quite a flexible mattress that can actually start transferring the load. And this particular one was being used to build a bridleway. So there you go. That's actually what pavements are all about. Thanks, Claire.
That is proper
geeky this week.
Proper geeky, but strangely and perversely definitely interesting. And who wouldn't want to have a hammer named after them? Dr. Baden-Clegg, what a legend.
There we are, see.
Thank you for that. And I do actually have a question in the Q&A for you from Bev. What happens to a footway if the soil underneath it is weak / not suitable?
It's exactly the same. So if you're building the carriageway bit that the motor traffic is going on, that's designed based on the traffic expected. But with just a footway or a cycle track, you still have to worry about a minimum depth. So, for example, a standard treatment you often see is they'll dig out the footway, they'll stick the edgings in on their concrete, sat on the ground there, and they'll put a very, very thin footway in. And then it starts to fall to pieces. So you've still got the issue of frost getting at the soil that's underneath. You've still got the issue of maybe, refuse trucks bouncing over the footway. There is guidance on how thick you should build the asphalt layers to resist that. But if the ground is that terrible, you still have to do some kind of improvement. So I cut my teeth in the Thamesmead part of southeast London, which straddles the Greenwich and Bexley border. And essentially that's built on, let's call it a marsh for a better description. And there you could dig down for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 meters and still not find decent ground. So what you have to do in there is go into the soil and actually improve that. You can use special, it looks like netting, but it's a special engineered membrane that can be used to make the layers a bit stiffer to create this area that you can build off. But it's just as important to get the footways and the cycle tracks right as you would with the carriageways.
And it's sort of penny drop for me, Mark, when you put that initial diagram of the triangle with the load and how it gets spread out. Presumably, this is why as vehicles have got heavier, SUVs I'm thinking of, and they park on parts of the pavement, i.e. the pavement part of the pavement that they're not designed to park on. This is why we see the damage that we see, because that essentially that formula has not been used to calculate what that top bit needs to be, because they're not intending a massive heavy SUV to be on it. Is that, I've garbled that, but do you know what I mean? Could you explain that?
There is that to some extent. So I mean, an SUV per se isn't causing damage to the road bit, but if it's bouncing up on the footway and the footway's only been designed for foot traffic, then yes, that can start to cause the damage. And what you do find is if you've got somebody who's always taking a vehicle over, so it could be a refuse truck trying to get around the corner, it could be somebody who parks their work vehicle in the same place every day. Over time, you will start to see some ruts and dents appear if the footway is not up to the job. So yeah, another reason to keep vehicles off the footways, because otherwise we end up building things so thick, it's just a waste of materials, carbon footprint and all the rest of it.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that, Mark. Always nice to get a little surprise of insight into the detail world of highways engineering. And if anyone has got any suggestions for Mark, he can't promise to do them, but if you've got anything you want Mark to focus on, you could post it in the chat now, and he might consider it. In the meantime, I think it's time to bring this week's session to a close, and I am delighted to say that next week our speaker is a woman called Didi Edgerton-Warburton, who is an economist and is going to talk to us about the kind of economic perspective of cycling and transport policy, which I think, bearing in mind a lot of the ways that we help make things happen is through things like business cases and understanding the economics of why we would do one thing and not another. So I'm looking forward to that myself, and I hope to see some of you next week. And thanks again to Alice, our speaker this week, and to Mark. And if you've got any suggestions for future speakers or future topics for Mark, do post them in the chat, or you can email us activetravelcafe@gmail.com. Thanks, everyone.